Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina, coming at you from the Messy Time Studios from the glorious Space Coast of Florida on the 17th of August, 2022. I am joined from the upper Midwest by my friend and colleague, Jeremy Drane, the Chief Commercial Officer of Monax. Jeremy, thanks so much for coming on the show. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited for this conversation.
Awesome. Now, we Floridians find the things hanging behind you baffling. We don't know what they're for, but we can touch on that later.
Sure.
Do you use those for hunting gators? Anyway, so why don't you? I'd love it if you just give a little bit of your background, because our guests range across the spectrum, from politicians to authors to techies to business guys. So, what's your background? Where do you think you fit into the global ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually, Christopher, I was checking out the website, and you have such a great sort of description, which is you unvarnished clarity about the truth behind politicians' lives while providing equal airtime to positive and creative people, advancing our understanding and appreciation of the world. So I'm in the latter half, the
Yes,
creative
thank
and
heaven.
positive people. So Jeremy Drane, Chief Commercial Officer for Monax Labs. And we're a software company. We like to think of ourselves as a Web3 infrastructure provider. And really, what we do is we take NFT technologies and infrastructures and standards and synthesize that with legal and contract management platforms and really bring those two worlds together. Our core objective is to essentially make NFTs and NFT transactions safe, secure, and most important to us, legal. And so this is really where we focus and where we're trying to carve out our futures.
Excellent. There are a few terms in there to unpack for those who are not
Certainly.
technically conversant. I think people hear a lot of phrases tossed around, and I'm thinking of kind of your generically intelligent professional person, or anyone who's taking an interest whatsoever. Web3. What does Web3 mean?
Somebody asked me that question, and I say Web3 is internet you own. I don't quite know how or what the right definition of Web3 is, but it really is to me, a concept that is founded on owning your data, owning your digital assets, owning your place in the digital world, not so much where you're using a centralized platform and they offer you that service for free, and then all of the data that you are and that you produce ultimately becomes the product, which is a perfectly fine commercial transaction between
everyone's gotten that point by now. That anything free means that you're the product, right? They're taking your data.
And I don't find that to be a bad thing. I mean, LinkedIn offers me a perfectly awesome service, and I'm great to use that. Although I do actually, now that I think of it, pay $60 a month. But at the end of the day, they did.
I'm not willing to pay to be censored, but go on.
Goodness, yes, Microsoft did a really good job there. But yeah, so I just generally think internet you own is really the concept, I think, that underpins the term Web3. And collectively, I think as we become more digital citizens and move into the digital world, ownership of your digital rights and your digital property and your digital identity is much more important than in the prior versions of the internet and the web.
That's interesting. So from a kind of regulatory governmental perspective, would things like Estonia offering completely digital identity documents and passports and all the rest of it be kind of a precursor, or they were just early to the game on Web3? And how would that be tied to the European GDPR legislation around kind of controlling companies' access to and ownership of your data if you yourself choose to opt out of that? Would those be kind of examples people might have heard of in the real world as to what kind of leads towards Web3?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Web3 isn't a thing or an event, or it's a set of, I think, collective experiences and tech and processes, all of these things coming together at once. Digital citizenship is just one potential construction of it. I think Estonia was obviously on the bleeding edge, although we're now talking to folks that want to create patronage. What do they call them? Patronage citizenships, not digital citizenships, but patronage citizenships for different cities in say Europe that have extremely high costs to maintain their infrastructure. And as COVID comes down and people can't come and visit, they need alternative ways to generate revenue. And a digital patronage or citizenship becomes a means to build a community when people can't come to your city. And this is another conception of Web3 in real life.
That's helpful. So let's hop over the other big thing which so many people have heard about. Actually, NFT, so non-fungible token. Right. Just very briefly, we've had a number of conversations about this topic. And I would love to hear your take on it, because the average person who's paid any attention to anything crypto or blockchain, all they know about NFTs is that bubblehead actors with too much money in their hands go on Jimmy Kimmel and they share stories about how they bought a picture of an ape for $90,000, and they all seem smug about it. How would you? So when people hear NFT, they predominantly think of that nonsense. How would you describe the utility of NFT and why you think there's something real there as opposed to kind of playing cards?
Sure. So I think the way that I think about it, right or wrong, is it's a unique digital asset. And I think that that's an interesting area to focus on, because if it's a digital asset, by sort of definition, is you copy paste and you can make a billion of them, and there's no additional cost from the first to the billionth. And so, but being able to have a unique digital asset allows all different myriad of possibility. And I think this is really what the underlying tech is all about. And as we move into digital worlds that have digital assets, it's going to be important to be able to say, that is mine, Jeremy Drane's.
Right.
I own it. And even though somebody might copy paste it, or they might do whatever they're going to do because it's a digital asset, maybe they can do that. At the end of the day, that is mine, and it has value for whatever reason it has value. And that's a new concept. I think people are so used to copying and pasting files on their computers that they can't get their mind around the idea that you can create a unique digital asset. And as a consequence, that uniqueness has very specific scarcity and value. And I think that's the hill that collectively we have to get over in terms of helping people get the 101.
Well, the good news about that is there are, there are a few hundred years of precedent in the sense of copyrights and patents, right? This is not, you can watch a movie at home, but in the beginning you get the scary FBI warning that if you, invited 8 people over and charged them $4 a piece to watch the video, they're going to come fine you $250,000. So there's already the idea that, yes, I can see it, and I can actually kind of manipulate it in the sense of put a DVD in my in my player, but that doesn't mean that I actually own it in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, there are rights pertaining to it. So the good news about that, I always find that things that are way too new have a long lead time for adoption. So and I take this as a good sign. People understand the idea of intellectual property. Now, many ignore it willy-nilly, but that's different than not believing it exists in the first place. And you made an interesting point about NFTs being applicable to property in the digital world, but as certainly being in the physical mining world, right, or in real estate, the NFT can also represent just the digitization of title to things in the real world, right? So for whatever reason, whether it's easier to transfer, convey, check records, whatever, I've seen certainly the applications that we're focusing on is around using NFTs for real world things like commodity transfers, commodity title, replacing warehouse receipts. In some sense, no different. If I give you a warehouse receipt to 1,000 tons of nickel in a warehouse in Shanghai, well, good luck. But a warehouse in Singapore, you can actually go redeem that. There's actually nickel there. You can replace that warehouse receipt with an NFT in a similar fashion. You're seeing a lot of demand for that sort of thing, real world touch points.
Oh, absolutely. So NFTs can be purely digital. And of course, they can also represent a physical item or object or really anything. And so the use cases have just tremendous potential. What you just were talking about are use cases that we collectively think about in terms of like utility NFTs. These are NFTs that serve a very specific purpose. Maybe they automate a workflow or a business process, or they allow for some sort of potential transaction to occur. You also have commercial, what we generally think of as commercial NFTs, which are NFTs that maybe you're buying because they're a piece of art or they represent a video game asset or any of the other sort of current flavor of use case. So, but ultimately, the technology can be used to, as we said, represent real world assets, represent real world business processes, represent timestamps and completions of specific workflows, just as the technology can be used for representing a digital good in a video game.
So like a good real world example would be, and I spent a lot of time, spent a bunch of time with some folks focused on sports tech more generally a few years ago. And one of the biggest headaches they've got, say you're the owner of a football team, right? And you want to provide some degree of ongoing stickiness to the customer experience, right? So one example of NFT could be, it's perfect for a stadium, right? Because there are 30,000 seats in a stadium. There are days on which football games are held, right? The NFT is perfect for that because it literally is non-fungible. If you've got seat number 68 in row F in tier Y, that's it. There's only one of those, and that's coincident in time and place with a date. So you can timestamp that. So rather than selling you a electronic ticket or a paper ticket, they can issue an NFT, which, if they choose, could represent some sort of intermediation between a full-blown membership where you get like a season pass, right? But you can allow gradations of that. So you went to the game, you sat in the seat. That's an event, as you talk about, kind of a commercial flow. Tick, that's over. But unless you can time travel, you can't go use that again. So, but you've used it, but you still have the NFT. Sure. And maybe that NFT has things like it automatically enters you into a lottery every month for a free ticket or whatever, right? So part of the attractiveness that we see kind of commercially in looking at these structures is it maintains its life. Right? It's not just a closed commercial transaction. It can be, but if you want to, you can extend it so it just sits there. And if that NFT sits in your wallet on your phone, you might get all sorts of surprise goodies. Maybe you're going to get a discount on a pay-per-view event if you can't go see the game in person or whatever. And all of that can be done, but I think the point that you touched on earlier, which most people are grappling with, is to what degree are there disputes arising out of this? How do you make that legally binding? And that, as I understand it, is kind of really the magic sauce of what you guys have worked on. Because the tech itself, writing the code, is not that hard. Even an idiot like me could do it in Solidity in a week, right? But how do you make that actually satisfactorily binding for parties and the legal system should a dispute arise?
Yes. So just maybe you said so much. You said so much. So maybe just to sort of address the first part of your comment, which was, the sports use case. So once you get into your mind that you can create that there's a unique digital asset, and that unique digital asset can represent a seat in a stadium. Then all of a sudden, what you can do is you can very simply start to add additional value to that seat license. And they do this today, which is if you get a seat license, we'll send you a t-shirt in the mail. I mean, it's just a matter of creating an experience for the consumer such that they lovingly spend money on your brand or your football team or whatever it is. And NFTs are no different. And in fact, they make the ability to construct an experience very, very simple, because most of the things that we buy in life are digitally purchased. So I'm going to buy a hotel room, and I'm going to buy a t-shirt, and I'm going to buy a movie ticket, and I'm going to buy all of these different things can be digital transactions that collectively can be brought together in a singular experience, and that the purchase of the NFT represents all of these different acquisitions of all of these different components. And then, of course, as your point is they're updatable. So, just like you hit refresh on your subscription every year, or you buy the same thing over and over on Amazon, you can do the same things with NFTs. You can constantly refresh the content so that you maintain the relationship with the consumer. And so it's a perfect vehicle for mass market selling of products and services, media, and so forth. And that's really the direction that the tech is going. Now, in terms of the second part of your comment, which was around legal, this is really where the rubber hits the road, at least our view. And the bottom line is that for corporations and enterprises and institutions to really lean into the tech, they need to be able to manage their liabilities. They need to be able to protect their IP. They need to be able to guarantee their royalty and revenue streams. And that sort of scaffolding that needs to be built around what are NFTs is immature. And that's, of course, the reality. This is new tech. And really, the tech has been out on the battlefield proving its fitness relative to other tech investments and finding use cases where it's relevant. And that's really where the tech has been over the last couple years. And now everyone's looking at it saying, wait, we can do some really big commercial things here, but for society to accept it, for regulators to accept it, for grandmas to want to be able to buy it and use it, we need all of this scaffolding around it so that it can actually be used. And that, from our perspective, the big unlock for NFTs is legal. If they're not legal, they're not going to scale. They'll be a very niche-y sort of tech where the conversations are dominated by crypto bros, and the way you get recourse when somebody steals it is you go yell very loud on Twitter. But if you think that kind of structure will work at a societal level, I mean, just ask your mom, hey, does that work? And she'll smack you upside the head and say, stop talking silliness to me.
Well, she's got 700,000 followers on Twitter, so maybe.
So who knows? But I mean, that's really the issue. I think for fungible tokens, the unlock for adoption was taxes. And we can talk about that, but that was the issue that had to get solved back in 15, 16, and 17 for enterprises to figure out how to execute information reporting protocols so that they could really start on the institutional side to buy it and build service offerings around it. NFTs, the big unlock is legal. And until we can get the legal parts corrected, the technology will continue to innovate, but it won't hit that scale that we need for it to be really a societal technology that has, huge impact. And that's where we believe it's going, but the legal issue needs to be addressed. And that's why we're specifically focused on it.
And that seems very smart. I mean, a kind of basic layman's question would be, there's nothing new under the sun, right? People are familiar with ideas like escrow accounts that are human mediated, right? I'm willing to pay you $1 million for, your herd of elephants. If my lawyer can be assured by your attorney that those elephants have been delivered to my compound in Botswana, right? Once I get them, I'll give you the $1 million, leave aside the legality of that. But you get the point, right? There's that human mediated idea that I will park some capital here, removing some of the credit risk to you, right? Because we've pre-agreed a set of conditions that if all are met, you get paid, I get my elephants, wonderful, right? So conceptually, what have been the stumbling blocks or hurdles to just adapting to a digital world? What people have done legally across national boundaries and the like for hundreds of years. What was the sticky point that was so unexpectedly difficult that you're only now getting it solved?
Well, what I would say is that NFTs were built by financial engineers, and they were built and the worlds that they've created up until this moment are built on fungible standards. So you had ERC20, which was the technology standard upon which ERC 721 and 1155s were created.
And which is all about the Ethereum blockchain, for those who aren't.
It was all about the financialization, and in terms of taking what we successfully did with fungible tokens and building a non-fungible token world on top of it. And the people that were fluent and capable for creating those worlds were financial engineers. But the issue is that unique digital items are property. And so they also fall within a legal paradigm. And if you're an engineer, the worst words are, hey, we need to talk to a lawyer. Because then all
you
of
don't
a sudden,
have to be just an engineer to have that reaction.
That's true. That's true.
Any normal human being recoils at horror.
Yeah, but the issue is that you take something that is elegantly designed from an engineering point of view and you try to build on it. But the issue is that it may not work from a legal point of view. And so what has happened is, at least my view, is that non-fungible tokens as digital property have innovated and innovated and innovated. And now they've gotten to the point where there's sufficient value where when transactions go sideways and things go wrong, people are looking for recourse. They're looking to tap into the exact same structures that they use when somebody takes their car, or doesn't take it, let's just say steals it,
right?
Or they lose something, they lose the keys to their house, or there's common legal frameworks that we use to mediate our real world that don't exist in the digital world. And so as a consequence, we're now having to look at non-fungible tokens, not through necessarily an engineer's lens about what is the greatest, simplest, most beautiful design for a smart contract. It's how do we make sure that when two parties are fighting over an issue that we can tap into 700, 800, 900 years of property law to help us expedite this so that we can move on to the next problems and we can do this at scale quickly. And so this is really where the ecosystem is today. They're basically bouncing up against all of these legal paradigms, and the engineers, the people that created the worlds, don't have the skills to be able to navigate them. This is the jurisdiction in the domain of the legal community, and it really is trying to bring these two things together. It's just incredibly difficult, and that's where we find ourselves at this moment.
That's helpful. So in reality, it's actually not that complicated. It's just a matter of making sure, because I learned long ago you don't need a lawyer to write a contract. You need a lawyer to fight about a contract, right? So if two rational people, however you define that, agree terms, I'll do X, you do Y over some course of time for remuneration Z, that's a contract. Now, if someone argues later that there may be components of that are illegal, part of you doing Y is, selling me 40 pounds of hashish. Well, we're not documenting that, right? So there are a lot of issues around what goes into permissible agreements, but that's not a technical issue, as you point out. That's a legal issue.
Well, one thing I would say though on that particular point, it just sort of demonstrates sort of some of the engineering complexity with the legal complexity is when you buy an NFT, it's a singular transaction. You just basically find the NFT and you hit the buy button.
Yep.
And that is the construction of the user experience as defined by an engineer, because let's face it, that's the easiest way to execute a transaction. Make the consumer hit the button once.
Right.
The problem with that is that doesn't include the consumer agreeing to any existing terms and conditions associated with the digital asset that they're buying, which could be, this is my IP, you're buying it for personal use, no consumer use, or any iteration of commercial constraint, right? So the issue that you have is that the engineers have built a system and a user experience that assumes that just by hitting the button once, which is the buy button, you're at the same time agreeing to the terms and conditions that maybe have been put onto a website somewhere. And this is problematic because there's a whole set of case law that says that's not accurate. When you buy a digital good, you have to accept the terms and conditions separately from buying the good, which is why whenever any of your listeners go online to buy something, they always scroll to the bottom and check the green box.
Yeah, I'll give $1 to whoever actually read those once. You're like, wait a minute, my firstborn child, what?
Exactly. But what courts have said is you have to give consumers the ability to understand what are the constraints associated with the commercial transaction before they hit buy. Well, that's problematic for the engineers because the engineers want to have a world where by hitting the buy button once, you are at the same time
agreeing to all that stuff, right?
And what courts have said is, nice try, that doesn't work. And so now what's going to happen is, this is one of the fundamental problems of NFTs is that users aren't agreeing to the terms and conditions before they actually buy because the consumer buying journey doesn't include that part of the process. And so there's all of these disputes after the fact,
right,
in terms of like, what rights did the consumer have or not have? And so one very basic and instrumental change to the purchase flow that is going to happen, which we are building the tech for, is the enablement of the accepting of terms and conditions prior to the purchase of the NFT. And although it's not as technically elegant from an engineering point of view, singular transactions that do multiple things are always the most efficient way.
Yep.
The courts have said this is the way you do it if you want to ensure that you have your rights and consumers understand their rights. And so this is just one of those scenarios where engineering elegance is bouncing up against legal practicality. And you have to build technology that understands both the engineering and the tech, and then create solutions that thread that needle. And that's what we're doing.
That makes sense. And that really seems to be more of a retail problem, right? Because, one of my mining firms I'm involved with is issuing an NFT around commodity sales. but that's a institutional product and an institutional relationship, right? So they're not stressed about reviewing general terms and conditions as a precursor to executing the transaction. But those are large dollar amounts, and that's not like flipping through Amazon and buying a book on a whim, right? There's a big difference in clicking $18.95 and do you want shipping tomorrow or next week? That's very different than a big industrial transaction, for say aerospace parts or whatever. And so is that what you're seeing in practice, that industrial applications or institutional applications are a lot easier to get done because of that pre-existing kind of transactional sophistication of the people involved in those markets, whereas the real headache is trying to get retail markets up to speed with that as efficiently as possible with minimizing the disruption to transaction flow, right? Because you want to make it as easy as possible. Is that really the bottleneck? And the institution's like, yeah, I get it. I've got to tick 3 boxes. Okay.
Yeah. So obviously the technology is going to mature along a variety of different use cases differently. And so the retail use cases, because the tech really was born and has been driven by retail buyers buying art and collectible items. And so a lot of the legal issues are being sort of thought through and solutioned along that trajectory. And that's really the most advanced at this point. In terms of the institutionalization of NFTs for use cases that might be relevant to Wall Streeters and such, that's really very, very new. I mean, to be honest, your use case is the most sophisticated NFT use case that I've ever seen. And when it's funded, will be the largest NFT project ever, period. It will be larger than, the Bored Ape land sale, which is, I think is about 125 million. Yours is actually could be potentially multiples of that. And so what that means is that a lot of the legal issues that you're facing from your project are just only now being discovered.
Right.
But ultimately, what we know for fact is if buyers don't view what they're buying as being legal, they won't buy them.
Right.
And so, and so these NFTs have to have legal standing, legal certainty. Some lawyer in all of your clients is going to look at these things and they're going to say, are we really writing a check that large for a digital good? And even though that digital good represents
attachment to a physical good, they're going to want to make sure that that is a perfected interest and is not something that can be,
You're smarter than me. So perfected interest is a term of art I'll definitely use going forward. But yes, that's 100% it.
Yeah.
We're using a new technology to execute what are traditional transactions in a different way, but we have to make sure that every person involved in that process flow agrees that these are legal by design and that every subsequent transaction is legal by design and has finality. And so the construction of your NFTs requires a different set of documentation, a different set of perspective in terms of the construction of them, as well as the transfer of them, every step of the way from now until those NFTs are no longer used or have been exhausted.
Absolutely. And that has been what we've been having been blessed with being part of a lot of innovations in the capital markets in my 25-year career. It is my usual definition of genius is that when you see it, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense, but you didn't see it, right? And so I've been delighted to be part of a lot of really, really brilliant innovations, the bulk of which were not mine. So I was very happy that this one was mine, in the sense of just a little bit of a synthesis between a couple of different things. And it seemed to make it seems to make all the sense in the universe. You've got a more readily transmissible and easily packaged set of ownership documents. It's fundamentally no different than if we took the time to write it with a quill on vellum. It would just take longer.
Exactly.
Right. And
exactly.
That has just been the thing that I have found most interesting about all of. I'm old enough to have been part of what became fintech. I was there before it had a name, right? So it just makes all the sense in the world. You're speeding up the boring parts of commercial processes without sacrificing legal certainty, right? And
Exactly.
that is the power of computation. It is not artificially intelligent. It is not smart. It is not anything other than taking away the drudgery of dipping a quill, sharpening a quill, making ink, dipping the quill in an ink thing, and then writing 800 pages of vellum, rather than just committing that to a PDF on the blockchain. I had this great epiphany just a couple of days ago on a discussion on the show where, and this is why I think this is so important to try to get the operational fundamentals of what is generically called blockchain or crypto or Web3 to have the general public understand it more, because that's how there's going to be big adoption, right? And this is for someone who has sat on the board of a crypto prime broker, right, that has been involved in these markets commercially for a while, thought I had a pretty good grip on the technology, and I only really fully understood that the huge amounts of power spent on Bitcoin mining, right, the guys that are validating the blockchain, somehow, and I had this erroneous, and I may just be dumb, somehow in my brain I had this idea that all that computing power was because the computation required to do the next block on Bitcoin was some incredibly elegantly difficult mathematical problem that required all of that. It really is automating a monkey hitting a space bar and guessing, is it 1? No. Is it 2? No. Is it 3? No. Is it 4? No. That's all it is. And somehow that all this process I've been going through for years, I didn't quite get that it really is as boring as, is it 1, is it 2, is it 3, is it 4, as quick. And if you could find a monkey that would tap a space bar faster than an ASIC could guess numbers, you'd hire the monkey for bananas instead of powering the ASIC. Right. And I think, and because there's still so much confusion, partially because marketing sizzle, wizards like to use complicated language to fool the general public, whatever the reasons are.
Right.
There's nothing incredibly complicated here at all. And the industry, either mistakenly, because they're terrible at speaking English, or deliberately, because marketing sizzle sounds cool, as we used to laugh in the last few years, that you could automatically get a bump in your stock price if you said, we're using blockchain, right? If you said,
well, now it's metaverse. Now it's metaverse.
Metaverse, blockchain, metaverse, right?
That's 10% increase in your market cap just by putting that in your filings.
I'm setting up a distributed database company. You get crickets market-wise. So
very much so.
The sizzle can often overtake the steak, and that's fine. That's marketing. That's human nature. That's fine. But it often can come at the detriment of the real market development, because when people understand this isn't some incredibly complicated thing that I can never get my head around, right, and they understand, it's actually fairly boring and programmatic and therefore safe to use, that's where the real market growth is going to come from. And that's part of why on Messy Times I love having folks at the intersection of technology and commercial application, because that's where the understanding is going to come from. I have brought on a lot of really brilliant technologists, and all I try to do with them is get them to explain every term, right? So people get a better grip on how this actually works, why it's going to be fundamentally useful.
Well, two things. So number one, most people are like, what really helped make this tech click for you? I was an SAP guy before I was a PwC guy, before I became a crypto guy full time. And SAP back in the late 90s, early 2000s really helped me understand business processes, interfaces, and then just the relentless desire to make those processes more efficient and more interconnected and more integrated. And because if you did that, you could, for the organizations across the world that run SAP and Oracle and Salesforce, that was the method by which they would get operational improvement that would then reflect out and drive their ongoing quest for EPS going up. And when I ran into crypto and blockchain and Bitcoin, I really looked at it mostly in terms of like, oh my gosh, it's automating and cutting out just a whole bunch of just useless crap that we've had to have in place because we didn't have the computational capability or the algorithms or the game theories to be able to automate this in a way that was fair, that society would accept, and that we could do at massive scale. And really, that's where we're what I think we're all seeing now. I would also just say that there's a really smart dude that runs, he's the CEO of Heavy Metal Magazine, which is one of our clients and we can talk about. And I was in LA a week or two ago, and he was like, and he's just he's a crypto super brain too. And his perspective is that crypto people, in terms of marketing the tech, they like to argue. They like to debate. They like to show they're the smartest people in the room, because that's how you get airtime on Twitter and CoinDesk. Is you get out there and you say provocative things with big words where you're talking about zero knowledge proofs as being the solution. And 99% of the world is like watching this theater wondering like, what the hell are these people talking about? And they must.
I'm not trusting my money to that crap, whatever it is they're talking about.
Right. And but the reality is, and his point is always, or his point to me is, the simple solutions win.
Always.
And really, at the end of the day, if you strip it down and strip it down and strip it down, this tech is doing some amazing things because it is automating and simplifying some incredibly difficult processes in a very simple way. Yeah. And that gets lost in all the jargon and all of the news that rolls out about crypto going down and crashing and all of just the theater. The reality is we are automating and simplifying massive workflows by taking out central authorities and doing things in different ways. And that collectively is going to be what allows us to significantly improve all of the infrastructure that we use both in the real world and in the digital world. And that's really what is the key win when I think about crypto.
And another big one is that decentralization, which is one of the big things that's thrown around, is actually a splendid example of arguably kind of civil rights and financial inclusiveness. And I say that not to throw more, spaghetti at the wall, but because a great example, and again, not taking the political side of it, whether you think it was right or not, just mechanically, during the trucker protests in Canada, where the truckers were saying to Justin Trudeau, the prime minister, was mandating they get vaccinated. Many of them had rational reasons not to. They already had COVID, whatever the reasons were. But a lot of them were like, I sit alone in a truck and drive. Who am I infecting, right? So whatever the reason was, again, we don't have to get into taking a side about that. But the thing that matters here is those truckers, someone set up a GoFundMe account so you could donate Canadian dollars, US dollars, pounds, euros, whatever.
I remember.
Support them and their families who are, rightly or wrongly, again, not taking a side about that, but offering them money so they could, pay for gas to keep their trucks warm in the Ottawa winter, their kids with them, pay for food, all that. Justin Trudeau's government demanded that GoFundMe shut off those funds. So that's a centralized authority was able to hit a no switch, and that money stopped. Instantly, those people who switched over and began to send them money via crypto wallets were able to get money directly to them. Right, because there was no off switch. And in a world where, again, not taking a political side, just the reality of it, right? When you hear, condition or not, when you hear the United States or Switzerland wants a central bank digital currency, which would just be, well, I no longer need to print physical money, right? I can just give it to your wallets. That doesn't make you so nervous. When you say North Korea or the Communist Party of China are going to create a central bank digital currency, that gives you a slightly different feeling, So,
Right.
and we have a great example in the private sector right now. PayPal, right? It's a private company. People take their dollars, their crypto. First, it was dollars. It's in my PayPal account, right? That's my money. Well, PayPal decided a while ago on their own that they will not allow you to use "quote unquote" your money to buy ammunition. Right? They just decided that. So that's a little weird. It's your money. They said they're providing you a service that's just a digital wallet, right? It's like having a bank account. And I put my $1,000 in PayPal for whatever reason I did that. And then I want to use that to buy 22 ammo because I'm going, to the range for harmless target shooting. And I find out that I can't buy that ammo because a private company has told me I'm not allowed to engage in a private commercial transaction. So you just multiply that out. That sort of centralization can either be, depending on where you sit, a great thing, a bad thing, a scary thing, right?
Sure.
And it's an interesting point about what you use blockchain technology for, because people get all confused about it, whether it's cryptocurrency or not. I had Craig Wright on a few weeks ago.
I did. I listened.
Great show, great guy, right? And I'm not getting into the debate about
show.
Satoshi Nakamoto. I don't care, right? Someone has to be Satoshi. Is he Satoshi 100%? Is he a third of Satoshi? Is he? I don't care. The fact is, he's deeply knowledgeable about the space. So
incredibly smart man,
right?
Totally.
And his point was fascinating. I'm glad I had that chat because something he said has stayed with me the whole time, and I've come to realize the truth of. He said there needs to be only one blockchain. All this stuff about different cryptocurrencies, all that is utter nonsense, because in reality, there need only be one blockchain, and that should be Bitcoin as originally created by Satoshi. And I thought about that. I'm like, but there's Ethereum and Cardano and Solana and all these different protocols that are built on the blockchain that are either cryptocurrencies with that name or they're protocols that you build smart contracts on. And his insistence about that as just an a priori obvious truth really made me think about it. I've come to realize he's kind of right. There's one internet. There's one set of protocols by which we interact across the world. That doesn't mean you can't build your own private intranet that's just between 6 guys, right? You can do that. But the moment you kind of connect it to the internet, it's just part of the internet. And so I'm curious about your reaction to that, because I'm almost there conceptually, technologically, but what do you think about that assertion?
Well, I guess what is the definition of blockchain? Is the fact that, if his definition of blockchain is the Bitcoin blockchain specifically, I just wouldn't agree with it. The guy's a genius and much smarter than me on a lot of different levels. And from an engineering point of view,
he's right.
I agree. Like, from an engineer's perspective, and he's an engineer through and through, this is the most efficient, simple, effective solution. One blockchain to rule them all.
Right.
But I personally am in crypto because crypto gives you the ability to innovate. It gives you the ability to build something and then put it out into the world and then let the market decide. And ultimately, maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong, but it doesn't even matter. The market has made its decision, and that's what markets do.
Yep.
And so I'm not really interested in paradigms where there's one person saying that there's one answer. I think that we can all agree that depending on what subject matter you're looking at, that is a terrible outcome. I think choice is really what we should be going for. Optionality is what we should be going for. And we should be creating a world where you can build things, put them out. The market will determine if it's successful, if it's fit for purpose. And then once there's a sufficient critical mass, then you start to build all of the sub-process flows around it. Legal, tax, compliance, governance, risk, all of those supporting frameworks that allow you to institute it into the lives of billions of people can then get layered on and we can see mass market adoption. But this idea that there's one blockchain to rule them all, it just goes against sort of who I am as a person, because I'm constantly curious about like what else is possible. But I go back. If he says there should be one blockchain, I don't maybe disagree. But the reality is depending on how you define blockchain, you could say that Bitcoin and Ethereum and Solana and Cardano and Tezos, they're all one blockchain.
Right, because the same sort of protocols and methods are used. And I've been pondering this for a while, so I put you on the spot right here. But I agree that there is that sort of competition and saying, well, each of these different cryptocurrencies are the bases for which you built this coin or this token, which will serve specific functions, and therefore you've coded it to have those specific functions. That is a market choice, right? I don't need the old singing, old dancing everything for a very specific purpose, right? So, and that makes all the sense in the world. That does reward it. I've kind of looked at it as kind of linguistic collapse, right? So you've got one of the greatest phrases, I love it in Italian, is un traduttore e un traditore, which is a translator is a trader, right? And if you have any facility with more than one language, anyone will know there is actually no such thing as translation. There's interpretation, there's gloss, there's always interpretation, right? And so I kind of view that statement about one blockchain the same exact way, right? There are many ways to describe a process. There are many ways to describe an event, and how one phrases that differs based on the language one is speaking. And there's often no equivalency. There's often, words for which you have to do a lot of explaining. There's that great movie, I don't know if it's a great movie, but I love the scene, Lost in Translation, where Bill Murray played this famous American actor who was in Tokyo getting paid a lot of money to film an ad for a whiskey, right? And the best scene in that whole film, I thought, was the director, who only speaks Japanese, like gives him extensive direction for like 3 minutes, talking. He's just sitting there, and then the translator, the young woman who was telling him in English what the director just said, he said, "Hold it a little higher." I love that. And so,
exactly.
In some ways, that's kind of where I think. That's kind of where I think that statement about there's only one blockchain is maybe eventually it will all collapse to one protocol, right? There were multiple sorts of competing protocols for the internet. The French the French decide to ring fence their internet and try to say, this is our protocol and this is going to be what we do. And the world just washed them away. We're not doing that. You can either connect to the internet or not, whatever you want. And so,
yeah, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time advocating for something. I would prefer to put it out into the marketplace and let the marketplace decide.
Yeah.
And even though you might be right, and goodness gracious, how many times have you yourself been right, but the market doesn't
care.
Respond.
Being right and $1 gets you a bad cup of coffee.
Exactly. And I guess the one thing that I would point out related to this is that we in our company are going to be putting out a platform that synthesizes legal contracts and property law paradigms and digital right frameworks into NFTs.
Right.
And a lot of people in the space, I imagine, are going to push back on this and say, this is not the most technologically engineering way to do something. This isn't elegant. This is not the most beautiful way to solve this problem. If we could just hold law over here and let us build our stuff,
sure,
we're going to build you something even sexier. And I think from our perspective, the cool thing is we've built a platform that addresses IP issues and royalty issues so people can use NFTs just like they use DVDs and CDs and all of these other different constructions of selling digital goods. We're going to put that out into the world, and the market is going to decide whether or not they think we did a good job. And it
Right.
really doesn't matter whether I think we did a great job as a co-founder of the company. And it doesn't even matter if some really brilliant engineer looks at it and is like, oh my God, that's a bastardized NFT
Cobbled
platform.
together, horrible
It's just,
Frankenstein
oh my
monster. I hate
God,
it. Right.
it's just what will matter is, does the market like it? Does
Yeah.
society
Does it
accept
work?
it? Does it work? Does it help address all of the constraints that society puts down on technologies before they really let it scale in a big way? And so we're going to get a lot of people that by the time this thing actually airs, there's going to be press releases put out that National Lampoons and Heavy Metal Magazine, who have like 50 years worth of historical IP, are going to package up that IP and sell it to the next generation of consumer using NFTs, where all of the IP is protected and the royalties are going to be paid and all the liabilities will be managed and all that stuff is going to be done so that they actually can bring their brand into the real world, into the digital world. And there's a whole lot of people that are going to look at those NFTs and they're going to be like, wait, they're different than the ones that were built in NFT 1.0.
Right.
They're not as elegant. They have interconnectivity to legal agreements and stuff like that. Doesn't sound sexy. And then the market will decide if we're right. And that is what I'm most excited about. And, bless Craig's heart, maybe one blockchain was the right answer, but the market has said many blockchains.
Yep.
And that's the way the world is. But I guess if you are meta and take a step back, maybe there is just one blockchain. We just different iterations
commercially converge to that, right? It's not a binary discussion. It may well collapse to, we can travel around the world as Americans and talk to pretty much anybody because the British were pricks. With English is a universally adopted language because they were just more aggressive than anybody else. So that's a knock-on effect of a few hundred years of empire. They certainly didn't set out to make English, the adopted language around the world, to make America's life easier to travel anywhere.
My son reminds me, or he's a history major and just a brilliant kid, and he always tells me that German was only like a vote or two away from
becoming the U.S. official language. Yeah,
the U.S. official language. I don't know much about that kind of history, but I find that to be an interesting near possible future.
Well, here in La Florida, right? We roar with laughter. I was growing up in New York. I've been lied to my entire life that the first Thanksgiving happened at in Plymouth or wherever. The first Thanksgiving happened 150 years earlier, and it was held in Spanish. It was held in St. Augustine. Right? So even our own national history is often modified by who decides to write it. I find it hilarious. Miami is the only city I've ever been to where if you speak to someone in English, they answer you in Spanish. They just will not speak to you in English. It's awesome. Oh. And so in some ways I love it. Like you can travel throughout South America, you can go to Spain and people will be accommodating to you if you don't speak Spanish. In Miami, they haven't made a stink about it like the Quebecois have done in Montreal about you have to speak French to me. Even though I understand English, I'm just going to ignore you if you don't speak French to me. It's in Miami, I love that they just jump right to the practice. They don't make a big statement about it whatsoever. And it's funny because it works, right? My Spanish is not great at all, right? But knowing Italian, I understand it enough. And I've had entire transactions, like renting cars at airports, where I'm speaking 90% English, some bad Spanish. They're speaking back to me in Spanish. And it's fascinating because it's kind of like cross protocols on the internet. But if it manages to kludge together and work, it works. So
I could have done so much more over the course of my life to learn other languages. I sort of toe dipped into Spanish and French and German, but never to the point where I could utilize it other than to
buy a beer.
cerveza, whatever. I mean, I just have done such a poor job in investing in other cultures in terms of learning their language. Yeah, I guess I only speak crypto or whatever.
That's enough. That's good enough. So is there anything we missed that you think is really, really important about this space that if there's like kind of one thing that you would want the general public to really understand without any waffling or hesitation about crypto, blockchain, what in your mind just makes it so much easier for people to go, oh, I get that. I can do that. That's not scary.
So I was volunteering at an arts festival 2 weeks ago, and I'm in Minneapolis, and Web3 MSP is a voluntary group of a bunch of crypto people in this area that get together to try to advance the education of the space here locally. And an artist came up to me, and they were like, I was trying to think of, I don't know if they were a painter or a sculptor or whatever they were. And they came up and they were like, we just don't get it. We don't understand, like, what the hell is going on here with these NFTs. We do art the old school, the real way, right? Or whatever
Things like paint.
And what I said was, and I tried to articulate this concept of unique digital item. And the way that I said it was, if you're a digital artist and you spend 3 months building and creating this beautiful digital painting, there will be a moment in time when you're done, and where you're going to step back and you're going to look at all of that effort and passion put down into the computer, and you're going to be done. And at that moment in time, that's the same if you were painting a painting, creating a sculpture, whatever it is, right? And really what happens is for that artist that has this digital good, they now can timestamp it, and they can now memorialize it through the serialization on a chain, that this file was the first file of this digital picture. And even though somebody can come along and they can copy paste 1 billion times, this was the file that was first. This was the unique one. And just like an artist feels that incredible sense of satisfaction when they finish drawing with pencils or painting with brushes or sculpting with their hands, it is no different for a digital artist. And it is the capturing of that moment and being able to then say, this is the first, that is really what was really the moment where, at least in my mind, NFTs shown as a technology and this idea of a unique digital asset was born. And from there, everything else is now starting to come forth, whether it's commercial use cases, utility use cases, institutional use cases. But it was the ability at this moment for artists, digital artists, to capture that point of origination. And when you articulate it that way, I think it makes sense. It makes sense to the artists that collectively look at the space and are like, what the hell is going on? But then also synthesizes in people's mind this idea of creating a unique digital item that can represent not just a painting, but a financial transaction, a step in a financial transaction, an asset. All of those things are possibilities because we're able to, at a specific moment in time, register something as being unique that is also digital. And
that immutable audit trail of creation versus replication is what enables people to say, okay, this is the one that was actually real.
That's correct.
And that's around, all the stuff around, zero trust and proof of work and all that stuff that enables people, without trusting each other, without knowing each other, on a decentralized basis, say, we all agree that that's the real.
We all agree that digital painting or that digital file that represents maybe a car, or that digital file that represents a hotel room on the 5th floor of Pasadena on a September evening, like all of those things are real digital assets.
What I love about that is one of the most fascinating things I encountered when I was studying anthropology was there are no universal conceptions of a range of things, right? Including ironically what a thing is. What I mean by that, and this is where I think this does tie to blockchain and NFTs, right? You go to if you watch like Antiques Roadshow, or you go to an antiques auction or something, right? Americans especially, even more than Europeans, Americans especially, and at car shows, all of it, they place huge emphasis on, is it the original thing? Like if you have a chest of drawers that was painted blue in 1740, right? If no one has touched that paint, even if it's faded and cracked, an American buyer antiques collector will value that more than the exact same thing if someone touched the paint up in 1950, right? There's something valuable about that, capturing the human interaction in time, at a moment in time, whereas very different conception. I'm not gonna. This is broad conceptions, right? But if you go to Beijing and you look at a lot of the temple structures that date back hundreds of years, in reality, they don't date back hundreds of years. The architectural blueprints, the diagram, the design date back hundreds of years, but some of them were destroyed during wars, and they were rebuilt as recently as 1980, 1990, right? But there's no difference in value ascribed to the rebuilt thing, whether it was destroyed by fire or not, which is a very different way of looking at the world. You can't walk through. You could reconstruct an entire, Duesenberg from 1910, right? You could build it exactly the way the manufacturer built it, but it wouldn't have remotely the value that the Duesenberg, if you found it in a garage, hidden in a barn for 80 years, would have. And I think that's pretty fascinating. And that timestamp ability, that original validity or validation of that validity is very much tied to culturally how we value things. And I think that's
100%. Yeah, and I certainly think value is a combination of factors. Certainly, it is whatever the item is. So if it's a hotel room, it's going to have a value because that hotel room has a value of $400 on a Thursday in the middle of September. But then there's also all of the other dimensions associated with it, which is the experience that you had while you were there, the traveling, all of the sort of interactions, and it is the combination of those things that really,
many of which are unpredictable and non-programmable.
Exactly.
They're only emergent properties. Well, awesome, Jeremy. Thank you so much for coming on. This is actually fascinating discussion. I look forward to getting reactions from folks.
I didn't realize that you studied anthropology. You have such a unique and very broad perspective, and you put things together very interestingly. And it now makes sense to me. So that's a new learning for me. I guess what I would just say is I appreciate this opportunity. We are going to try to really do something revolutionary for the world in terms of making NFTs legal and NFT transactions legal. And I think for people that want to use the technology and have that type of certainty, we're going to be a very interesting company to work for. Yep. I totally appreciate the opportunity to come on and just have this chat, which you and I have anyway, but we just recorded it for everybody's benefit. But this was a great conversation, and I'll be interested to see what your viewers or listeners have to say about the combo.
And to end on a very meta note, this conversation will be timestamped and will be turned into an NFT.
We can definitely do that.
Absolutely do that. So thanks again. And as I close, traditionally, till next time, to my listeners, thanks for tuning in. Please turn off the mainstream media. They are lying to you. And tune into Messy Times. Until next time, thanks so much.
Cheers.